All right, thanks for praying. Hey, most of you will remember this story from this past summer. On June 23rd, the Wild Boars boys soccer team from a village in northern Thailand went for a post-practice adventure exploring a nearby cave system. And as the group was exploring the cave system beneath the ground, a monsoon rains hit the region above the ground, and rising floodwaters trapped the 12 boys and their coach deep inside the caves. If you don't know the story, they had only planned to explore for about an hour or so. They wanted to write their names on the walls of the cage, some sort of like team initiation rite. And so they had brought absolutely no food, no water, no warm clothing, and all they had really on them by way of supplies was a flashlight, just a couple spare batteries, and one rope. Well, anyway, as the floodwaters grew, and continued to flood the caverns beneath, the group found it necessary to go deeper and deeper into the cave system to find dry ground. And to be perfectly honest, it was perhaps a little bit unwise for them to go into the caves, which were, first of all, they were out of bounds. They shouldn't have been where they were. And secondly, it was just unwise for them to go during monsoon season. So anyway, shame on them a little bit, but they made their way deeper into the cave system as the floodwaters rose, and hours turned into days into a week, and that week even to additional days, and their hopes were dimming for rescue as, really the flashlight dimmed. And I just thought it'd be interesting just to feel the dimming lights. Just to survive, the group actually licked fresh water that was dripping down the walls of the cave, and they took turns digging, or attempting to dig with rocks through the cave walls. Hopes diminished because they had no way of knowing if anyone even knew they were alive, let alone where they were. They had no signs that anyone was trying to communicate with them, and they had no way to communicate out to the outside world. There was no breakthrough, no awareness that there was any breakthrough coming from the outside. And so what had started out to be just a kind of a harmless little fun adventure had really turned into a hopeless nightmare. And it was not the way it was supposed to happen. And so I think the story actually serves as a picture for how life can sometimes go. We start out at some point in time on what's supposed to be just a harmless, exciting adventure, and then some unexpected, storms just hit us from out of nowhere. And we can find ourselves trapped in a place that we really weren't prepared to be stuck in a place that seems to grow a little bit darker with each passing day. We can find ourselves stuck in a place, this microphone I think is cutting out. We can find ourselves stuck in a place that, to be perfectly honest, maybe was a little bit unwise for us to choose to go into. Perhaps some areas that were out of bounds. And our hope levels can go down as the floodwaters rise with no apparent sign that there's any awareness, from the outside of what we're going through. I don't know if you can relate with that. Well, going back to the wild boars, after about 10 days had passed since they had entered the caves, their bodies were growing weaker from lack of food, and their hope growing weaker from lack of breakthrough from the outside. The boys were huddled, as you see in this picture, on really a small beach, deep inside a chamber. You can see they were over 2.5 miles in from the entrance of the cave, over, 4,186 feet. That's a couple miles, right? A couple miles deep into, from the surface of the mountain. And suddenly they heard, as they sit huddled on this beach, they heard splashing down in the water in front of them. And then they heard the sound of voices speaking English. And what had happened, if you know the story, 2 British scuba divers who had specialized in cave rescues had been stringing safety ropes through the flooded areas of the caves, and they popped up in this cavern, and much to their surprise, they saw all 12 boys and their coach huddled in the darkness. And it was at that moment when a light broke through and these voices broke through, that hope also broke through. And so what I thought would be just appropriate is just to light our Advent candle, which in a moment we're going to explain is the breakthrough of a voice from the other side, a breakthrough of light from the other side that came for rescue. So what happened then over the course of the next week, once the boys had been discovered by the British divers, it was actually a very, very, very complicated rescue attempt. There were many, many difficult challenges they had to solve to get the boys out. And so it actually took them about 3 days to devise a plan that was going to work and to actually, get the people and the materials that we're going to need. When it was all said and done, there were about 3,000 people that were involved in the rescue of these 12 boys and a coach. So finally, 3 days of planning, and it took another additional couple days to actually extract the boys. So on July 10th, they had been trapped, I think it was on June 23rd, so 18 days after they'd gotten trapped by the monsoon. The last of the wild boars, the coach, was at last rescued from the cave. And I share that story for this reason. I think the rescue part of the wild boars story, it provides us with another picture. The picture of the incarnation. That's maybe a word that some of you are not familiar with. It just really means the becoming of flesh, the incarnation, God becoming flesh. And I think the rescue of the wild boars is a picture of the incarnation, the picture of God stepping into human history in the form of a man, that very first Christmas. And here's the connection. In the same way that the stranded soccer teams, increasing darkness and diminishing hopes were restored when a voice broke through from the outside, when a light broke through from the outside, so too in the incarnation of Jesus Christ, someone from the outside broke in. It was like somebody from the outside diving down into the depths of world history with a safety rope in his hand, stringing a safety rope into world history. Jesus was, and Jesus still is, a voice from the other side, a voice from outside of the hopeless and dark situations that we find ourselves in, a light from the outside of the hopeless and dark situations that we find ourselves in. And the Bible actually tells us, by the way, that this is exactly what happened in world history. This is not just a clever metaphor. The Bible tells us that in the advent of Jesus, there actually was light that broke through into the darkness of world history. The biblical prophets called Jesus by numerous titles, and we're going to be singing many of those titles in the Christmas carols that we sing over this Advent season. The prophets foresaw the coming of the Son of Man and the Son of God. They saw the coming of the rod of Jesse, or the Son of Righteousness, Emmanuel, Messiah, Jesus. And in all of these prophetic visions, squinting into the future to see what the prophets saw was this light breaking through, hope breaking through, a voice breaking through for our rescue from the other side. One of those passages, prophetic insights we read about in Isaiah 9. The prophet Isaiah was squinting into the future to see a day when this voice and light would break through. And this is what he saw. Nevertheless, that time of darkness and despair will not go on forever. The people who walk in darkness will see a great light. For those who live in a land, in a place of deep darkness, a light will shine. And in several places throughout the New Testament, the authors confirm that what Isaiah was seeing was Jesus. Jesus fulfills this prophecy. Jesus popping up on world history, that very first Christmas as a baby, Jesus popping up in the dark and despairing world was really on a cosmic scale, like the British divers popping up into a dark and despairing cavern. Jesus was the great light that began to shine in a land of deep darkness. And so in Jesus, this is the simple point I'm making, rescue has shown up, not just for the world in general, but for you, for me. In Jesus, rescue has shown up from the other side. And that's what this candle represents, the light of Jesus breaking through, the hope of Jesus, the voice of Jesus that's available to us now, and as real in his availability to you now as this visible flame is right now. That's how real Jesus' rescue is for whatever you're facing right now. Well, in another of Isaiah's prophetic glimpses, we really gain some insight into the nature of Jesus' rescue. Matthew, one of the authors of the Gospels, a New Testament author, he applies this other prophetic glimpse that Isaiah had to Jesus in Matthew 12:21. This is what Matthew writes about Jesus. He will not crush the weakest reed, meaning like a reed, a plant. He won't crush a weak reed or put out a flickering candle. And finally, Jesus, will cause justice to be victorious, and his name will be the hope of all the world. And what I want to spend time is just unpacking a couple components that we read in these prophetic glimpses of the nature of Jesus' rescue, a couple aspects of the nature of Jesus' rescue that I hope will give you hope in whatever it is that you might find yourself stuck in this morning. And so first of all, verse 20 tells us this, that Jesus will not crush the weakest reed or put out a flickering candle. And so these words simply tell us that Jesus did not come to crush us in our weakness. Does that make sense? He didn't come to crush us in our weakness. He didn't come to extinguish our flame when we're struggling to stay lit in the winds of life. You understand that? It's like, whoa, it's like, oh, snuff that thing out. That is not what Jesus came to do. He didn't come to grind us down when the batteries on our last flashlight were running out of juice. What we see in these words is that Jesus' rescue actually comes in gentle grace. I want you to say those words, gentle grace. Jesus' rescue comes in gentle grace. Now, could you imagine going back to the wild boars situation if the British divers had surfaced in this cavern where the wild boys soccer team, that is so hard to say, where the team lay stranded. Could you imagine, and if the British divers had surfaced like, oh, there you are, you stupid, irresponsible brats. What in the world were you thinking coming into a cave during monsoon season? Right? We can't imagine that, can we? Right, we can't. And even though, as I said before, there's truth in the fact that it was a little bit foolish for the wild boars to go into an underground cave during monsoon season, we still can't imagine the British divers showing up with punitive judgment as their orientation and rescue, can we? No, we can't imagine that. But listen to this. In my experience, many people do easily imagine that that is Jesus' orientation and rescue. Jesus pops up, having dove down into the dark hopelessness of human history. And many of us imagine him popping up and saying, well, there you are, you stupid, foolish people. What in the world were you thinking? I'll tell you what you were thinking. You weren't. Right? I think it's easier for us to think of Jesus that way than to think of a couple British scuba divers. Yeah? And that is exactly why the Father had to write these words down for us. It's why he had to write it down for us. Jesus will not crush the weakest reed. Jesus will not put out a flickering candle. And so this means for you, whatever darkness you're facing, whatever you find yourself trapped in, Jesus' rescue comes to you in gentle grace. And listen to this, even when you got yourself trapped in that place through some decisions that might have been a little bit foolish, a little bit unwise. Jesus' rescue comes in gentle grace. He will not crush the weakest reed or put out a flickering candle. And so I just want to invite you to take a moment of reflection right now. So in what areas of brokenness in your life, perhaps even in what areas of foolishness in your own life, do you imagine that Jesus would pop up his head and say to you, "You stupid idiot"? You know what I'm saying? What areas? And so take a moment to think about that. In what areas of brokenness or maybe even foolishness in your own life do you imagine Jesus showing up in punitive judgment? Take a moment to think about that. And now think about this. What would it look like for Jesus to come to your rescue in gentle grace? What would it look like for Jesus to show up for you saying, "I'm not going to crush the weakest reed. I'm not going to snuff out a flickering flame"? What would it look like for you for Jesus to show up in that way in this area of brokenness, in this area of foolishness? Take a moment to think about that. Bless you. Jesus rescues in gentle grace. That's our first takeaway from this passage this morning. Secondly, in verse 20, we see that Jesus' rescue also comes in justice. The second part of this verse says, "Finally, he will cause justice to be victorious." And these words simply tell us that Jesus rescue came to make things right. He will cause justice, what is right in the world, to win. And so Jesus' rescue came to make things right that are wrong. We've talked about this before. Jesus came to fix broken things, not to break broken things. Jesus came to fix broken things. Now, once again, returning to our wild boars, could you imagine if the British divers had surfaced in the cavern and said, "Oh, there you are, you stupid brats. Just to teach you a lesson, we're going to leave you here just a little bit longer so you can think really long and hard about the stupid choices that you've made." Right? So once again, I don't think any of us could imagine the British divers actually doing that, right? Even though we know it was unwise for the team to enter the caves during monsoon season, we can't imagine rescuers coming with any other orientation than, "Hey, we're here. Now we're going to get to work to fix this. We're going to get to work to figure out how to make this all right." Right? Wouldn't that what you expect? And that's what the British drivers, scuba people, said. But listen to this, again, in my experience, many of us do easily imagine that Jesus does show up as a rescuer. His head pops up in the darkness and the hopelessness of world history, and we easily imagine Jesus saying, "You stupid idiots," right? Just to teach you a lesson, I'm going to leave you in this mess that you've made. In fact, actually, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to scheme up some ways to make it worse, just to teach you a lesson. Right? Isn't it easier, being perfectly honest, isn't it easier for many of us to think that that's the way Jesus is? We wouldn't expect it of British scuba divers, but we do easily think that that's the way Jesus is, right? And again, because we are tempted to go there, that's why the Father had to write it down for us, what it actually looks like when Jesus' rescue comes. He will cause justice to be victorious. As a rescuer, Jesus came to make justice win. Jesus came to make things right. Jesus came to fix things that are broken, not to break things that are broken. Jesus didn't come to turn off the lights in the increasing darkness, right? Jesus didn't come to turn up the floodwaters when our lives are being inundated and overwhelmed, right? That's not what he did. Jesus came to heal, not to hurt. And so that means for us that we can have hope in whatever dark places we find ourselves trapped in, because Jesus didn't come to hurt us. He came to heal us. Listen to this. Even when we got ourselves trapped through stupid, Jesus came to fix things that are broken, not to break things that are broken. And so I want to invite you into another moment of reflection. So think about this. In what areas of your life would you say this is broken and it's in need of justice winning? Maybe it's some sort of emotional brokenness. It's some sort of physical brokenness. It's some sort of relational brokenness. Maybe it's just spiritual brokenness between you and the Heavenly Father. What areas of your life need a rescuer from the outside to cause justice to have victory? Think about that. And now as you consider that area that's in need of justice, what would it look like for you if you believed? If you lived your life in the truth that Jesus actually comes to make things better in his rescue? To believe that Jesus came to fix broken things? Take a moment to think about what that broken thing would look like if you lived in the belief of who Jesus is. Jesus' rescue comes in justice. One last point from this prophetic glimpse into the nature of Jesus' rescue. Picking back up in verse 20. So Jesus will not crush the weakest reed or put out a flickering candle. And finally, he will cause justice to be victorious. And his name will be the hope of, what are those last three words? His name will be the hope of all the world. And this last line just simply tells us that Jesus is the hope for everyone. Jesus' rescue is for everyone. Some of you need to listen to this right now. You are not an exception to everyone. You are not an exception to everyone. Though you may be tempted to believe that Jesus' rescue is for everyone, but you are not an exception to everyone. His name is the hope for all the world. And so again, I'd like to invite you to take another moment of reflection and consider this. What are lies that you believe about everyone but me? Does that make sense? What are the lies? Why do you believe, if you do, perhaps you don't, but why would you believe that, yes, Jesus is the hope for everyone but me? In other words, how would you truthfully complete these sorts of thoughts? Jesus is the hope for everyone who is smarter than me, but not me. Jesus is the hope for everyone who gets it right more than me, but not me. Jesus is the hope for someone who hasn't messed up as badly as me. Right? You understand? But not me. So how would you truthfully complete the kind of thought that would suggest that everyone means everyone but you? Take a moment to think about that. And as you think about those, consider this. What would it look like if you believed that Jesus is your hope too, in spite of whatever it is that just came to your mind? What would it mean for you that Jesus is in fact the hope of all the world, including you? As the Father made sure, I got to write this down because somebody's not going to believe it. Jesus is the hope of all the world, everyone, including you. What would it mean for you to believe that? Think about that for a moment. And as you're thinking about it, actually, I'm going to invite the worship team to go ahead and come up, and the communion servers, if you want to go ahead and get in place as well. So let's just pull this all together. Whatever dark places you may find yourself in, and for some, maybe those dark places are really dark, and maybe for others, it's maybe not quite so dark, but it feels a little bit hopeless. Maybe it feels a whole lot hopeless, and the batteries are running dim, the flames are flickering. Whatever it is that you find yourself trapped in, and even if you got yourself trapped there through some unwise decisions, the point I want you to walk away with this morning as we celebrate the advent of Jesus, the rescuer, coming into our hopelessness and darkness, is that we can have hope. We can have hope, whatever it is, because Jesus did in fact come to rescue. Jesus did in fact come to heal. Jesus did in fact come to fix broken things, and he comes to rescue in gentle grace. Not in punitive judgment, but in gentle grace. And he comes to rescue you, because he comes to rescue everyone. Jesus' rescue is for you.